Hello, good morning. Welcome to today's discussion on dose response. And we are going to have a continuation of where it ended the other day. We started and went as far as the slide that is on page 16, right? The one displayed. And we looked at criteria, effect criteria, where we've got two modes of study. We've got acute, and we also have chronic test studies. Yeah, these are the two things that we ended with the other day. Now, I just have to give a little bit of emphasis on these two guys. The acute as well as chronic. How do you put clear-cut distance between the two? So what we're saying is that the way we were saying the other day that different dose or different concentration or different pollutants that are administered to human beings, animals. Let me just give a general statement. Different concentration, different pollutants that are given to organisms, they are likely to produce different adverse effects. That's the base of it all. And then the other thing that we said is that now the way these adverse effects are brought about, we may classify them into two categories. There are those pollutants that are so deadly. Yeah, get it right now and today, that there are those pollutants that are so deadly, just a small amount of it in your tongue, you are able to experience a lot of effects. Yeah, and then of course there are those that even if you take them today, it's gonna take a little bit of time for one to start showing to start having them expressing their effects. Let me go a little bit away from this. Let me just talk about maybe diseases. Yeah, let me talk about diseases. We may have HIV. When someone contracts HIV today, you can't see signs tomorrow. You just can't. Someone starts looking pale, loss of color and all that, skin color and all that, such kind of stuff. You don't see them the following day, or maybe even after 2 years. Maybe that's a lot of period. Let me say maybe after 4 months. You can't say it. You can't say it. You can't say it because it takes a little bit of time for the effects to manifest. Now, talk about the one that we had in Congo, Ebola. Even flu. Let me not even go to Congo. Just right here today, I've got flu. It doesn't really take time for one who has encountered the pollutant that brings about flu. It doesn't really take time for one to have effects displayed or effects portrayed or effects being expressed. These are the two things that we can bring to the understanding of acute as well as chronic. So I'm saying that in acute, the mortality is frequently used endpoints. That's what the point is saying. Now, what we are saying is that these ones, in acute toxicity study, something that can damage to be detected by the pH, to be detected by phenols, to be detected by a cyanide. But in short, what we are saying is that in here, we're talking about having a short term. So if you are to classify the pollutant in two categories, where the first category of issues being put in acute studies, we can go to those that are likely to produce results within a short term. And if the effect is flu, then I may likely to refer to it, because when someone gets flu now, the particles causing flu right now, it doesn't need to take years or weeks for one to come and experience flu. And yesterday I was in Zimbabwe and it was dusty, but I'm not sure if I'm going to have a flu. I'll have to express myself maybe after 2 weeks. It doesn't go that way. That is what acute toxicity study is all about. Focuses on those toxic pollutants that are likely to express the effects within a very short period of time. Then in chronic studies, we're talking about in chronic studies, what we're saying that this can be defined as a slow accumulating toxic effect. That's how I might define it my own way. That can be defined as a slow accumulating toxic effect. Metal building up. What do I mean? What do I mean? At times they advise us not to take cholesterol, the food that contains high levels of cholesterol. Why? High levels of fats. Why? Because today you eat these fats containing food, you don't do exercises, tomorrow you eat some more, the other day, what is happening is that these fats are accumulating in the body. And it takes a little bit of time for one to come and experience these effects. You don't just eat chicken shawarma today, tomorrow, but why? Because there's another chicken shawarma. Nishi muntu kaja ka micrometer kaja kama chita detect polarity ya metal nishi battery yaenda isira mumutu. It doesn't go that way. Why? Because it is gradual. It is gradual. So what we are saying is that the other point that we can bring about is that the effects at times or the change in BIOS, it's hard to detect under chronic. What do I mean? What do I mean? We're talking about the change in BIOS. It's difficult to notice. What we are saying is that if there is a pollutant that is likely to bring effects slowly, maybe within a long period of time, you can't even maybe trace that this person who has died because of the exposure he or she has had 5 years ago. It's really difficult even to trace the effect because it takes a little bit of time. That's what we're trying to say. Now, one thing that we need to understand is that when you are exposed to the pollutant, there are two types of things that we're going to bring into consideration right now, even as we prepare ourselves to go to the next slide. We'll just try to cover this thing now so that we look at something else. Okay, let me just cover this thing up. Don't want this, I want that. Okay, let me just cover it a little bit up. Then we'll look at this thing. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is there is a dose and there's concentration. Now, there are two things here that are important. One, concentration, we're talking about something in liquid. Mostly, we're talking about something in liquid. And the dose, we're talking about solid. So if these pollutants that are likely to bring adverse effects in living organisms are in solid state, we don't call it a dose. Yeah, it may also be in a liquid state, which you can call a dose, but we're trying to bring about diversity. We're trying to bring about distinguishment. Remember, we're trying to get now inside of the deep of the deepest. What are we saying? If these pollutants, that we're talking about, if these pollutants that we give, let's say for instance, we're given the pollutants and then are in a solid state, whose quantification can be maybe in kg. I'm just giving an example. Something solid, the quantification may be in kg. And then these pollutants are in a liquid form, whose quantification can be maybe in cubic centimeter. I hope you understand the difference. Yeah, the dose is about the quantification is in kg, and then this pollutant, which is in a liquid form, highly concentrated, we can express it in cubic centimeter. Now, if these two items are administered on living organisms, if these two pollutants in different states are administered on living organisms, we are trying to know how much of, let's say, how much of these should be administered to living organisms so that we have 50% of them dying. I hope you connect. Talking about having this pollutant in a dose solid state being administered to living organisms, resulting in the fatality. Fatal, 50% dying. That is one category of issues. Then the other one is this one, which is in liquid, which is concentration. If we get to have 50% of these, we get to have this pollutant, which is in liquid form, being administered to the living organisms, resulting in the mortality of 50%. How do you bring about the study of these two different items? That is what brings us now to what we call LD50 and the LC50. LD50 and LC50. LD50, we're talking about the amount of dose. D stands for dose. We're talking about the amount of dose that can be administered to the living organisms, leading to the mortality of 50% of the total population. How much of the dose should we administer to this population so that we get to have 50% of the living organisms eliminated? That is what we call LD50. What about LC50? LC50, they are one and the same, except that this time around, we're talking about the concentration. And remember what I said, the quantification of these items must be in cubic centimeter because it is in liquid state. So LC50, we're talking about the amount of concentration of the pollutant that must be administered to the living organisms, resulting in the termination of 50% of the total population. But what about L? L is talking about lethal. And how do you understand the word lethal? Remember, it was the other day I was talking about this, that say for instance, you just your uncle, then your uncle doesn't do much of salt. Your uncle doesn't do much of salt, prepares food for you, serves you, and then asks you to eat. Let's say Nshima, just get the first lump of Nshima, dip in soup, put in your mouth, you can't detect the salt. But you don't have to say, salt. Just say the amount of salt is not enough. There is a certain percentage or a certain amount of a substance that cannot bring about the effects. Yeah, certain amount of substance that cannot bring about the effects that can be seen to the people. There are times you get exposed to a certain amount of dust, you go home, you don't even get it that you were in the dust place. But the moment you are in that dust, in a pungent smelling containing gas in that room, you find that it won't even take a lot of time. You are going to catch flu. Why? Because now you have gone above the lethal detection. So lethal, we're talking about something, I think I might have mixed up. Lethal, we're talking about something that is likely to cause death. Yeah, I mixed up the lethal as well as the threshold. Yeah, so lethal, we're talking about something that is likely to bring about death. Let's hope we get corrected. Lethal substances are those substances that are likely to bring about death. Now, so lethal, so when you say LD50, lethal is talking about mortality, to do with death. So we're saying the dose that must be administered to the living organisms, resulting in 50% of the people dying lethal. Same applies to LC50. We're talking about the concentration. We're talking about the amount of concentration of the pollutant that must be administered to the total population, resulting in 50% of the population dying lethal, associated with death. Then I think I might have swapped with the tool which we call threshold. Yeah, threshold is the one that I was trying to talk about, visiting the ankle, sort and stuff. Yeah. There are times that thirst for money. You need a lot of money. Someone gives you a 15 way. Then you start wondering, this 15 way, what is it going to take me? It's as good as not having it. Threshold. So if you say in the poverty-stricken situation you are in, and then what is your threshold amount? You're talking about the amount of money that you need to have that can bring about change. Someone who doesn't have money and is poor and needs a lot of money, then even 50 kwacha times may not bring effect on someone's life. Mzapasa muntu 50 kwacha, adibena sapato. You go and buy tropical sandals, maybe buys, maybe even pair of socks. Before he realizes that he hasn't bought food, the money is not there. Threshold. We're talking about the amount of chemical exposure that is likely to bring no potential adverse effects. We're talking about the amount of chemical exposure in relation to toxicology. Threshold is talking about the amount of chemical exposure that are likely to bring no potential adverse effects. Then lethal items are those items that are likely to bring about death. So those are two important things that I wanted to talk about as you go to the next slide. So the next slide is right over here. Okay, why can't we go to the next slide? What is happening? Oh, okay, so now we is this about that. Happening now. Back away here. So I like the mouse left to that work. Can go to the next slide. What's happening now? Okay, now we're here. Thank you. So we're saying that chronic toxicity tests, which some books they call it chronic toxicity studies, may be performed over a long period of time, months, years, yeah, and stuff like that. So I think some of these things I've even talked about. They're saying different species of test animals may be more or less sensitive to some toxic chemicals. Yeah, I was saying certain human beings responded differently to the same amount of dose administered to them. I remember even the other day we were talking about factors that might help someone not to experience the same effect as the other person did, and one of which was the amount of blood, the body size, and all that. That's what this point is trying to emphasize on, that different species of test animals may be more or less sensitive to same amount of toxic chemicals. Like male and female. I think this is a very important point that we can even talk about. There's, I'm not too sure, but there are speculations, or there are facts that have been brought about that when two people get to have unprotected sex, sorry to go that way, but I'm just trying to bring it out. Two people get to have unprotected union, yeah, so that it sounds a little bit Christian. Yeah, two people get to have unprotected union to do with STIs other than HIV. It is believed that male are likely to experience the effects earlier than the female foxes, and the reasons are, of course, very well much known. I wouldn't even want to go in detail, but I'm just trying to bring it out, linking to what we experience in our outside environment. That is what this point is talking about. Then the other thing that we need to know is that because of the threshold, which we talked about, the amount of chemicals exposure that are likely to bring no potential adverse effects, we may get to estimate the amount of chemicals that can be exposed to someone without getting adverse effects. Let me not even go this far. Let's speak of a child is a little bit sick. The mother takes him or her to the hospital, and then the doctor says, your body, your baby isn't pretty good. I think the only thing that we're going to do, we're going to give you some drugs, going to give you a prescription of drugs. Mwana akadwala. Remember the other point that we raised in this discussion, we said was it getting same amount of dose, let's say 20 grams of Piriton, taking it at a go, you are likely to do harm to your body. But when you take this within a space of a week, of course, you find that the results may not be as deadly as they get to be when someone takes this amount at a go. So that's what the point is trying to emphasize here. That out of the dose that you administer to, out of a certain amount of pollutant that is administered to living organisms, you can come up with a curve that helps us to estimate how much of this dose can be given to the living organisms, resulting in a 50% of the people die. We can even estimate a certain amount of dose, certain amount of concentration, which you can call threshold in this case, in so much that even if a human being, an animal, gets to be exposed to this, there will be no effect. So such levels are the ones that you're calling humanly safe level. Yeah, something like that. So that's the point we're trying to emphasize on this, that we can come up with a curve that helps us to understand a certain amount of exposure. Let's say this, you drink one, you take one tablet of Piriton, how much effect is it likely to bring? Someone gets 2, how much? Someone gets 3, how much? Someone gets 4, all the way maybe up to 10. You have 10 people, and then you classify them in those categories based on how much Piriton they get. From there, you can observe their effects to say, provided these certain conditions are kept constant, the amount of blood they have is the same, the amount of body size they have is the same, and then you are able to observe and come up with a curve. So this curve here is talking about a dose, not the concentration. Make sure you bring about, you get to have a clear-cut distinction between the dose as well as the concentration. So because they have used the word dose, the dose response curve, it has to be LD. If it is the concentration response curve, it has to be LC, 50. So now we are trying to look at how do we understand this curve? We have to pay particular attention to this. How do we understand this curve? They have just they've just tried to clarify some stuff here where they say 5 is LD50, the species exposed to the dose, LD, dose, through the oral route, that is likely to cause 50% of the population die. And we're saying can be measured in milligrams, can also be measured in kilograms. I think that's what I'd raised even earlier. Then LC, we're talking about the concentration exposed to these species through inhalation, route through the nose, and then or maybe breathing through the mouth, and then the quantification can be done ppm, particle per million, or milligrams, or can be in centimeter cubed. Then we're trying to look at this pollutant, this substance. I don't know how to read it out, NOEL. So now this NOEL, remember what I said about piriton. I'd gone for that because we know that piriton is one of the drugs that are mostly abused by people. So we're talking about piriton. This is piriton here. Let's say someone gets 2 tablets of piriton, if those are tablets for sure. How much effect does it bring? We look at that. No effect. No effect. So we're saying taking 2 doesn't really bring about, can eradicate the situation someone has in the body, but cannot bring about other side effects. Okay. Then what about, let's say 4? When someone takes 4, the disease goes, but you get to have some effects. Then what about when someone gets 6? It is now worse of it all. So when you're talking about a dose, you need to look at the lower limit, the actual, and the high limit. Those things are very important because even when you go to some of the caves that I even saw in the past papers, they had the one line in hidden details, then this one. Yeah, yeah, these are very important things, whereby you have one which is a hidden detail, and then the other one is in a full wedge. What does it mean? You can have one here full wedge, the other one hidden detail, and the other on this side hidden detail. What does it mean? So you have the lower limit, the actual, as well as the upper limit, and stuff like that. But try to look at this substance. No, highest dose at which there is no observable adverse effect. So there must be some highest dose that you can give. It doesn't bring an effect, and some dose response curves may not even have the threshold. What do they mean? Some dose response curves, or some concentration response curve, or some pollutant do not have a threshold. What does it mean? Any small amount of dose, any small amount of concentration you administer, it brings the results. There are some which are like that. Let me talk about the COVID-19. They said there was that deadly wave. Ikakugwira chabe, their effects. Kulibe no and such and such, ikakugwira chabe, you have that effect. That's what this point is trying to emphasize on. Sorry, I have a little bit of flu, so each time I mute the mic, it means I want to attend to myself. It's the same thing, dose response curve, the same thing. So let's start looking at this part now here. It says that the threshold, once you take any amount of dose here and below, there are no effects. That's what it's telling us. But anything above that, it increases. Anything above that, you are likely to have effects. But again, the effects will be increasing based on the amount of dose that you give. And then you get to have the maximum here. The moment you go above that dose, the moment you go above the amount of dose which is here, you die. Die, death, death. That's what this thing is trying to say. So we have a threshold, no matter how much you get, but within this range, no effect. Within this range, you're likely to have some effects, but manageable, increasing depending on the amount of dose that you get. And then above that, maximum, there's no surviving. That's what this point is trying to say. So it's just the emphasis here, LC 50 and then EC. Okay, so we're saying that LD, we're talking about lethal dose. Lethal dose. LD50, we're talking about the lethal dose, which is 50% of the chemical estimate to kill 50% of the test population after a specific exposure time. These are things that I explained on. Yeah. Okay. What was important here? Confidence limit and measured degree of the scatter. Okay, no, okay. Okay, maybe let me talk about this part here, which says confidence limits are a measure of the degree of the scatter of the observed value. You have an actual line, you have one in hidden details on the left and the other one on the right. We're talking about the confidence limit, the amount of dose that you can have here, the amount of dose that you can have here, and the one that brings about the maximum effect. Okay, now let's look at that. Let's look at that. Pay attention to this question because it's there even in the exam. Now, before we go anywhere, what information can we get from here? We're trying to study two different chemicals. We're trying to study two different chemicals, which we can call pollutants. And how do we start them? We try and look at how much. Remember, this is LC, not LD. This is LC because we're talking about the amount of concentration. It's LC, not LD. Now, how do we look at that? How do we look at that? What we're saying here is that we're trying to compare chemical X as well as chemical Y. How do we compare them? So the first thing that we need to do is remember what I said about this line here in hidden details. This one here also on the right, hidden details, and then we have the full line. That is for Z. And then X also has the lower limit, the upper, and then the one that is in full vision. Now, how do you interpret that? So let us see the effects that each one of these is likely to bring. Maybe let's run through the points here, and then I'll come and add those of my own. So we are saying that LC50 value for the two chemicals are the same, but the concentration mortality curves are different. The values are the same. The LC50, what do they mean? They're saying the amount of dose that is given at that time here to bring about 50% of the population dying is the same, but the concentration mortality curves is different. Away from that, it brings about different values. Look at it later. Then the other point here says curve for chemical Z shows a flat slope, indicating mortality increases by a small increase as the concentration of the chemical to which the organisms are exposed. Yeah. Then let's go to the other one. The other one says the curve represents set of data of great variability as indicated by the large confidence levels. I'll explain on that. Then it says, on the other hand, the steep slope for chemical X indicates large increase of mortality associated with a relatively small increase in the concentration of to which the test organisms are exposed. I think that's enough for now. Let me close this part and then talk about some stuff here. For now. But let me not combine the X and Y. Let me bring it in a different way. How do I bring it? Let's have a curve of our own. This is the curve for LC50. Let us observe they're saying the gradient, the stiffness of the line. Yeah, the stiffness of line. This time we're talking about mortality, and this time, this side, if you are talking about DLC, LG, the dose. So the question is, how do you observe this? We are talking about, let's say 50, let me say 5, 10, 15. If this is in kg, so we're talking about 5 kg of a dose producing a certain value of mortality, 10 kg of dose producing a certain mortality, and 15 producing a certain amount of mortality. That is what the graph is trying to say. Now, let me bring in another one, which is gonna be like that. The black and the red. The one that is deadly in here, the one that is deadly is the one which is black. Pause for a while, ask yourself why. The one that is deadly right now is the one that's black. Why? Because to produce the same amount of mortality here, this thing needs a very small amount, very small, while the red needs about 5. But for the black one, needs something less than that. Then we go to this mortality value somewhere here. For the black one, you just need a very small dose, and you're going to have a very big value, less than 5. Yet 5 produced this one, but the black one produces that one. Let me say this is A, B, and C. Now the mortality at C, a black one needs a very small amount, but the mortality is very, very high. And if you can have another one, which is blue, this one is very, very friendly, because the mortality at A, when we do the extrapolation, you're likely to have a very huge concentration of the dose, or a very huge value administered, but very small mortality rate. The one at C, you need a lot of it, but the mortality is very small. So the gradient is likely to guide you on how deadly, lethal effects that chemical species is likely to bring about. So let us go back to the curve. Now, if you look at this stuff right here, it tells us that X needs a very small amount of X needs a very small amount of the chemical, but producing high results. Now, this point here says the LC50 value for the two are the same, because the concentration that brings about 50% dying is the same value, which is coming here, but the mortality at different concentrations is different. Talk about 90% mortality rate. If you are to go about 90% mortality rate for X, you come here, the value is about between 50 and 100, but for substance Z, you need something above 100. That's what they're saying. At different concentrations, the amount of mortality percentage mortality is different. So 90% mortality rate, the amount of X you need is very small, but the amount of Z is a lot. That means the one that you take in small amount and produces same effect as compared to the one that you take in larger quantity. Therefore, you can tell that the one you take in small quantities, the lethal, the chemical that you need to give is likely to produce high values. The good example I can talk about, maybe two different juice brands. Let's say cordial drink, or maybe let me say Granadilla and maybe any other brand that you know. You find that same amount of juice, you put in the water, and same amount of water, two different brands there, brand A and brand B, given the same amount of juice, same amount of water, sweetness will be different. The one that you put in small amount produces the same amount as that one with larger quantity. Then if that is a pollutant, it must be very, very deadly. So that's what this point is trying to say here. So when they ask you to add comments on this, just say X is more deadly as compared to Z. However, the LC50 concentration percentage is the same, but at different points, when you administer the same amount, other than this point here, when you administer the same amount of the chemical species on the organism, the adverse effects are different. That's what the staff is telling us. And the point here says the steady slope usually indicates rapid absorption and rapid onset of effects. If Kalan kaona kamunga niko immediate, that one is deadly. Then mkaona chiriso, you can even live in there because you need a lot of it for the results to be produced. That is the indication of this graph. That is the indication. That's why this point here says, on the other hand, the steady slope for chemical X indicates a larger increase with a very small amount given. That's what this point is trying to say. And then maybe from that, we can go to this one. It's the same thing. So they're just trying to compare the amount, or this one now is talking about time. Yeah, this one is LE T5. So it's talking about time, the amount of time that a substance, the amount of time takes for a substance to produce effective results. So talking about this one here, this one there, this one there, this one there. But all in all, if you ask me to comment on this, you find that the one that takes more amount of time, that one is deadly. Yeah. Then the one that takes a lot of time, of course, this one you can play around here and there. HIV falls here. If we're to talk about diseases, need a lot of time, about years and years, and then someone brings it in there, have the effects expressed. But what about this guy here? You just get a disease today. 3-4 days from that exposure time, you experience some stuff. Yeah, that's what the graph here is trying to talk about. You may have the same percentage of mortality rate, but this one here, the amount of time is small. That one increases until you get to have this guy who is friendly. And that's why I think people are even sleeping around knowing that HIV, because there are ARVs and stuff like that. But if HIV was to be killing us within days, there could have been sanity in the country. But of course, God is so merciful, and stuff like that. I'm not a preacher, but I'm just trying to dramatize stuff here. Yeah, these are real stuff. The moment they said COVID kills people mercilessly, everyone got into masks. But the moment they said there is their ARVs administered, or people became relaxed and stuff like that. Yeah. That's what this point is trying to say. And then this one here is talking about exposure concentration. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Yeah, so we're talking about the exposure concentration. Yeah, ppm and stuff like that. Remember what we said about mg? Take the one that looks like Y, but in a flipped version. Remember, talk about smaller quantities being expressed in micrometer, nanometer, yeah, milligrams per milliliter, stuff like that, ppb, ppm, and stuff of that nature. So it is very, very important that we understand the curves. There are times they give you the curve, the dose response curve, and then they ask you to make some comment in relation to the dose studied. You cannot have the concentration dose curve and then your comments are based on the dose. If the graph is about the concentration, please comment in that category of stuff. Here we go. Now we need to calculate the amount of human dose that we can call safe. The safe human dose. This part is very, 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 very important. That is the reason as to why now, when you go higher into studies, you don't need to do these calculations. Sometimes you even do estimations. When someone goes to a hospital who is sick, there are few steps that are very, very important. Step number one, when someone goes to the hospital, they have to take temperature. Because temperature also may be an indication that someone is unwell. Above that, of course, that normal temperature of a body, someone you can tell, I'm dying, must be better, such and such. And then we also have age. Age is very, very important. You go to the hospital and then the doctor just looks at your eyes and says, menso yako, yaoneka yellow, ndio dwara nkalapa. Imo vanesi, sister Mlenga, bring the nyeret, nyeret this one. Such a doctor, I think just run away for your life, because run for your life, because that's not a doctor as in per se. Someone who is qualified in a few days to measure the temperature, has to measure the age, in certain circumstances, has to measure even the height. At times, even the weight in the extremes, they measure even the weight, because remember we said the kg, the amount of body mass, can determine how much the dose may be given. Why? Because the body, which is very big, you give them 1 piriton, the piriton dissolves and gets assimilated in the body, it's going to be scattered into many body streams, body tissues. The concentration of piriton in that body going to be low. Someone who is small as me, oh my gosh, just a small amount, even the brain feels it, because the body mass has a role to play. That's what the point is trying to say here. So we're trying to calculate the amount. Now, why did I emphasize on this? Because there is an indication that if someone is of a certain age, there is an estimation of how much blood that person gets to have. The temperature indicates the solubility of the drug. High temperature results in a high solubility. Of course, some stuff, solubility product, common iron effect and stuff like that. But these are very important stuff. And then the weight also, like the way I had said, the weight indicates how much the dose that this person can get. So how do you calculate the safe human dose? How much the dose can be given to this particular individual, which is safe? Because remember, too much of drugs is also bad. That's why some people who are careful enough, it's like me at times when I just have like the one that I have, a bad one, I don't at times go to the hospital because I depend on natural immunity. Just do some exercises, stuff like that, maybe just natural remedies, and then you're okay. But too much of drugs are likely to bring danger to our body. There are diseases that we call acidosis. Much of drugs that can lead to the pH of the body, which is supposed to be normal, around 6.8, 7.4. Within that range, you find that too much of drugs may bring the pH to that of an acidosis. Of course, blood is considered to be a buffer solution. In the biochemistry world, you know much about this. A buffer solution is a solution which resists the change in pH. The blood is one of the few buffers that we know that resists, or they respond to any substance that is trying to bring about a change in terms of the pH. But in a moment where the amount of dose goes above the safe dose, then you find that the pH goes to that. You get to have acidosis, or even alcoholysis, whereby the pH goes above that of an acid and it goes that of a base, and stuff like that. So this is a formula that we use to calculate the safe human dose. That's the reason as to why when you go to the hospital, they take down those values, and then they're able to estimate how much of Panadol they can give you. Uyu ni mwana uyu ambera mutu batate wake na ambera mutu batate wake bapase Panadol ibiri, mwana uyu bapase Panadol ka half. Try to look at the safety, so that even after that headache goes, there should be no other side effects that are produced by the drug administered. So that's the formula that we use. Threshold 00, we're talking about the threshold dose at which no effect is observed. So you should know how much is to be given. Remember, we talked about that. Times 70 kg. 70 kg is not always 70, just the average body mass. That's why I said in extreme measures, they have to take even the weight of an object of that sick person. Then we've got SF saying this is a safety factor. It ranges from 100 to 10 to 1,000, but again, it depends on the dose that we can go the threshold. Yeah, that's the formula that we use to calculate the amount of dose that can be given, which is considered to be safe for the body of a sick person. Yeah, these are some of the stuff, and that's how it ends. That is how it ends. I can tell you this part is very important because we have seen certain things. Oh, those days when I was young, I would be like, wow. So I'm just trying to give a summary of it all. So like, oh, there's that juice. I've just forgotten its name because I'm used to this grenadier. There's that one which is like a long bottle, stuff like that. Cordial drink is just a small amount of juice. Then this one, you need quite a lot, but for the same amount of water. Why? Because this one is highly concentrated as compared to that. So if this stuff here is a chemical, which some small amount produces the same as that, which is a lot, then consider this one as a threat to human life. That's how you can do. And then the other thing that I need to talk about is how do you know which one is deadly? You look at how the line is going, the stiffness, the gradient, stuff like that. So I think that's where I'm going to end today. Do you have question clarity? Do not hesitate. Oh, it can't. My iPad is freezing. So there you go. 6 9 7 5 5 78 6 9 4. That's the number you can reach me on. Should you have some clarity and additional information, get to have some more. I'm going to upload this right on my YouTube channel for safekeeping because I've just been keeping a lot of Zoom videos, but I think it's important that this time around I start uploading them on YouTube and then I start deleting them from my PC. Have a lovely morning, have a lovely afternoon, have a lovely evening, depending on the time that you see this. Goodbye.